I'm so pleased to have today Kristin Oja, and we are going to talk about the successful launching of her new offices, the existing offices, and her plans for future offices. Kristin has obtained her doctorate of nursing practice, Masters of Science in Nursing, with a family nurse practitioner focus, and is certified in functional medicine. She's also an entrepreneur, as we will learn today, a functional and lifestyle medicine guru, personal trainer, group fitness instructor, and lover of everything health and wellness. Welcome, leaders. In a world constantly evolving, true leaders need to come from a place of resilience, with vision, and wanting to embrace change, which is all around us. I'm Dr. Sideroff, and this is Quantum Leadership Podcast, where we look at the principles that connect the mind, body, spirit, and organizational success. Kristin, it's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, and what a wonderful introduction.
Thank you. And let's start with your stat wellness, and let's talk about that. But let's talk about your path to developing it, creating it, and now growing it very successfully. So let's begin from the beginning. Where did you come up with this idea? Where was it born from?
Well, first, I always like to tell people I was born an entrepreneur, and I was born during a storm. And I think entrepreneurs were born differently. And so as you hear about my story, you may not be able to relate as much because of my personality and some of the traits that have led me to where I am. But I would like to say that I've always had the entrepreneurial spirit. And so if you go back, I was a personal trainer. That's what I started my career as. And I loved motivating people and inspiring people to be the best version of themselves. I feel like I was their cheerleader. Everybody told me, Kristin, get a college degree. Like, we don't care what you do, just get a college degree. And so I'm really big into mentors. And so I talked to different mentors and was like, I don't know what to do. I really love personal training. And my mentors were like, do nursing. You can always fall back on it. Everybody said you could just fall back on it. You have lots of flexibility. And so I went into nursing school, and I always tell people in my first rotation in nursing school, I was in the dialysis unit. So I'm this personal trainer with this high energy, wanting to make everybody feel better. And then I go to this dialysis unit that's dark. Everybody's curled up. Their blood's getting filtered for 4 hours. They kind of ignored me when I walked in the room. And I started questioning my path, like I feel like many people do on their journey to figure out what they're going to be and what they're going to do. I pushed through it and found the emergency room at the very end and loved it. And I'm an adrenaline junkie. I mentioned I was built differently. And so I'd get 13 miles in a shift. We would treat and street everybody. But I kept going back to my background as a personal trainer. And people were coming in with comorbidities. They were coming in with high blood pressure, strokes, heart attacks, limbs getting removed from diabetes. And I started to realize we're really good at sick care in the United States, but we do not know how to handle health care. Right? We have a very reactive approach to care. And so it started getting my brain thinking about, how do we think about healthcare in a preventative way? How do we get people healthier before they have a disease state? And if you look statistically, 80% of Americans have one chronic disease, right? I mean, this is a majority of people. And the CDC says that over 80% of these chronic diseases are modifiable through lifestyle. And so I went back to my training as a personal trainer, and I was thinking about how I was feeling about my career as a nurse. And I wanted to be able to help my patients make decisions. I wanted to be able to put them on a treatment plan. So I went back and got my master's, then my doctorate. My mind even then kept questioning, well, why is my patient having 5 sinus infections? Why is my patient coming in with IBS? And I'm a very curious person. And I kept wanting to think, what is going on? Why? And then I found functional medicine, which obviously is targeted to understand the why. What is the root cause of your symptoms? And so long story short, it was my passion for personal training, my frustration with our current healthcare system that kind of led me to create a very new model of care, which was Stat Wellness. And we opened in 2019. And I could go on the story of Stat Wellness's creation forever, which I won't. But that was in 2019 when we started.
Let me just interrupt to highlight a few of the things that you've already said, because I think they're so important. And the first one was how much you cared about the people you were working with and how much you wanted them to feel better and be successful. So that's one, I think, key to your success is how interested you were in the people that you were working with. The next thing you mentioned was the use of mentors. And I'm going to ask you to say a couple more words about how you used mentors, because I think it's such an important aspect of any kind of growth and becoming a leader, certainly, is to learn from the best. So can you, before I continue reflecting on some other things that you mentioned, say something about use of mentors?
Yes, absolutely. I'm a huge proponent of every phase of my life having mentors. Some of them have been more unofficial mentors, right? Just people you look up to, you value how they've lived their life, their characteristics, their values, and you just start meeting with them. And that was really a lot of my mentors were just people I met, whether it was through my church, whether it was through my parents' circle, whether it was through our premarital counseling. A lot of them, I think people think with mentors, you have to join some sort of group and be paired with a mentor and go through a formal training. But I think of mentorship as who do you respect? Who do you value the way that their characteristics, their lifestyle is? And how do you lean in on that? And they've evolved during each kind of phase of my life. My mentors look different. So right now, a lot of my mentors are female entrepreneurs that have scaled businesses. They're ahead of me, right? So you're always looking for who's that person, and the person that's your mentor at a certain age may not stay your mentor in each age of your life, right? It doesn't mean they're not a part of your life, but you always have to think about mentorship as evolving and who do I value, who do I respect, and who can I look up to in this area of life I'm in. And so again, right now, EO, like Entrepreneur Organization, was really helpful in this. I mentioned our church was really helpful in finding mentors, but they do change and evolve. And right now, mine are female entrepreneurs.
So do you just bump into them? You're in the right place at the right time? Or do you see somebody that you think might be a very helpful mentor and you go up and ask them if they're willing to be? What's that process for you?
Yes, it's been both, actually. More at the beginning, it was bumping into somebody. That sounds silly, but it was somebody that was part of my life, whether it was a professor in college, whether it was a group fitness instructor that was teaching group fitness classes before me. They were kind of more just people that were in my life that I really valued their opinion. Now it's much more of a seeking out mentorship. And I feel very fortunate because I work in a space where I work with a lot of executives, entrepreneurs, CEOs. And so some of them are actually my patients first, and they have approached me and they say, Kristin, I'm just so proud of the business you've built. If you ever want to grab coffee and if you ever want to bounce ideas off me, I'm always available. And that's kind of what it's turned into now. But you have to seek out, you have to be looking for it, right? A lot of times they don't just fall into your lap. And you also have to value what other people have to say, right? And I feel there are some people that have a hard time because I went through this too. Nobody wants to be shoulded. I don't know if you should do this. And that's what
It's a red flag in my language. Yes,
it is. And that's where it's, being open and then finding the right people, but you do have to normally seek it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I love the notion of a mentor. Just one aspect of it is someone who's ahead of you on the path, right? And so they've encountered some of the difficult issues that you will be encountering. They've done trial and error, and they know what works and what doesn't work, so it can save you a lot of mistakes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Another thing that you emphasized was curiosity. And it's interesting. I thought curiosity right before you used the word curiosity, because it was that aspect of your mindset, your approach, that had you delving into details and reasons and the whys that lead to where you want to take your entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. And in functional medicine, I always tell even new hires we bring on, you can't go into functional medicine if you're not curious, right? Because it's a complex space in medicine, but it's so rewarding and people are craving it. People want to know what's happening in their body, why it's happening in the body, how it's all connected. And I think that's played a huge role in our growth, which we can touch on stats growth, but it's really, I think you're nailing it. It's a passion. A passion has really led to the success of me. I feel like as a leader, the curiosity, leaning on mentors, all of that has played such a huge role in stat success.
Mm-hmm.
And we opened in 2019, as I mentioned, and within our 1-year anniversary, the pandemic hit. And we're a functional medicine and movement practice. I mentioned that we're really transforming healthcare into a approachable priced membership. And we have unlimited health coaching and dietitians, functional medicine providers, group fitness, all sorts of things under one roof. And as a leader, when you're taking all of these steps of faith, which we can talk about signing leases for $8,000, having nobody that will give you money, it is a very lonely journey at the beginning. So if any of your listeners are starting their journey of leadership or entrepreneurship, there's a point at the beginning where a leader, I would argue, is almost always feels incredibly lonely at the top, right? And this is what lean on the mentorship, community, finding groups. But at a year of us being open, the pandemic hits and we have to shut down our whole movement side. And that's 50% of our business model. And we had to do that for months. And I had to figure out how not to fire people, how to keep paying people. And I think about that all the time in stat success. I'm like, at our 1 year, we found out that there was a pandemic and we had to shut down. I also found out that day I was pregnant and I had 2 babies during this journey, which we can get into. But you have to be flexible as a leader. And I feel like that's something that entrepreneurs, and I mentioned I was born this way, have.
You continue to impress me with the challenges that you've encountered and have had to overcome. And there are a few there that I want to get into in a little bit more detail. But I first want to take a step back. And I'm curious about when you say I was born an entrepreneur, what you mean by that. What was it about being an entrepreneur that grabbed you? And then secondly, I'd like to ask you, because you could be doing all the things you do in functional medicine without starting a whole business and a whole center that you did. So those are the second question that I have for you is, how did you make that leap from, okay, this is what I do, to I want to have a center and employ other people to work with me to do this?
So when I refer to all like being born an entrepreneur, I'll give you an example. I was probably about 12 years old and I wanted to start a dance camp in my parents' backyard. And I built out a business model and I had them drive me to play it against sports because I couldn't drive. I saved up my allowance to buy a used gymnastics mat and a used boombox. And I started putting flyers in mom's mailboxes on my parents' street. And I had 14 kids in a dance camp for 2 hours in my parents' backyard. I was making $300 to $400 a week at 12 years old.
Wow.
And the parents loved it because they were able to go to the grocery store. They were able to come back. And then every Friday I put on a recital for them. So I had them sitting on my parents' hills, the parents watching the kids. And I look back on this and it just cracks me up, like what this little business I had going on. But I think that's the first example of my mind thinking of, how do I make money? How do I provide for myself? How do I lead? How do I create an environment to help others in a very simple way, right? I was helping the moms be able to go to the grocery store. I was helping the kids learn to follow direction. Very silly example, but a starting place of where I saw that I was an entrepreneur.
In that example, which is quite amazing, was part of your process noticing a need that you thought you could fill?
Yes, I think part of it is a need. And then part of it is this personality that's deep inside of my parents never had to worry about me being able to take care of myself. I think there was this kind of, I don't want to just have my allowance my parents give me. I want to have more. I don't need, so I think it's both. I think it's always there's a need that you see that you can fill. You're creative, you're curious, you're thinking. And for me, there's also this piece of, I want to provide for myself. I don't need to rely on anyone else. And this is where I mentioned that we're kind of wired differently. I'm really big on the Enneagram. I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram.
Yes.
So I'm a 7 on the Enneagram. And when I've met with a lot of entrepreneurs, we have very similar Enneagram numbers. And so I always talk about as a 7, I see opportunity in everything. It's very hard for me to actually see risk. I don't see risk until like way later, where my husband's a 6. He's a loyalist. He sees risk first. And you have to really convince him of the opportunity. It would be very hard for him to be an entrepreneur versus me. I'm like, all of it's an opportunity. You even mention a word as an entrepreneur and my mind's already figured out how I could build that into a business model, right?
Yeah. And, you're using these terms in the context of being an entrepreneur, but I would say that they are true for a broad range of behavior. If you want to move forward, if you want to achieve, you want to accomplish, you are going to get stuck if you look at the obstacles rather than the goal.
Yes.
And what you're saying is you look at the goal, you have the vision, and you see that. And then when you then look at the obstacles, they do not seem as big because they're in the context of this vision and this goal. Whereas if you start off with the obstacle, it makes it more difficult to see the goal and take the first step.
Absolutely. And one of my patients told me this quote that I just love. She said, fear sees the threat, anxiety envisions it. And so I thought about a lot of people that get hung up on whatever it is, whatever they're fill in the blank.
Yes.
That anxiety piece, they're creating a narrative that may not be there. And I think about how my mind works. It's like, I could be running. This is how I always describe my mind. I could be running towards my goal and all the buildings behind me could be crashing and burning. And I'm still looking at that goal, like what you're referring to with the obstacles. And I need people to balance that, right? Like I understand I wouldn't be where I'm at today without an amazing team, which is obviously critical for leadership, which we're talking about today. But it's a very different mindset because an entrepreneur or somebody that's done, maybe what I have with Stat or anyone else that started a business, there are so many things you have to be okay with. You can't get everything to be, type A, perfectly A+, or you'll be crippled.
Absolutely. And so what you're demonstrating to me and our audience is that you are able to focus and then stay focused, even though there's a lot of distractions that will pull other people in different directions.
Yes. And I think that's where I love. So we do the Enneagram on every single employee too that we hire because it gives you so much insight on how you view things. And it's very fascinating to me. Like, even if you think about our business. So when Stout Wellness first opened in 2019, everybody that applied to work with us, almost everybody was a helper on the Enneagram. They were a number 2. And this is really interesting to me as our business has become larger and more stable in people's eyes. Now we have a lot of 6s that like stability, right? So you can even see in our business the transformation that's happened and the talent we've been able to recruit. And we've been able to change our leadership style depending on the people we're hiring when it comes to personality types. So if anybody has not done an Enneagram, it's my favorite. I've done all of them because it doesn't put you in a box either.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now I want to take a step back to, you are 1 year in, the pandemic hits, you find out that you're pregnant, you're juggling a whole bunch of stuff, and now you're on top of everything else. You're losing half your business, and you're wondering, how am I going to hold on to my employees? Let me check in with you in terms of your emotional state, how you are handling this emotionally, because that's a lot of stress. So how are you doing from an emotional perspective during that tumultuous time?
Well, and I'm going to answer your question there and even go back a little bit because I feel like almost forced to start Stout Wellness. I joke because I was laid off twice from jobs and I was like, I can't do this again. So going all the way back, because our journey really started in 2018 when I was trying to get a bank loan and everybody kept telling me no. There was no proof of concept. Nobody was doing what I was doing. Nobody would give me money. And I came home to my husband and I was like, hey, I know I need to do this. I signed a lease today. It's over $7,000 a month. I hired one employee who's still with me, Sarah Rose. She started with me in 2018. And my husband was like, how are we going to pay for this? You've lost your salary. Nobody is believing in you. Not one person is giving you money. Turns out my parents gave me $50,000 to help furnish the space. But I started out figuring out like, I have to make this work. So the day one of when we opened, I used to call my husband every time we got a new patient that booked. I'd call him and be like, we got a new patient. Because I knew how many new patients I needed to see in a month to just pay our rent. Mm-hmm. I didn't pay myself $1 for 2.5 years. I worked from 3 a.m. to 11 p.m. every single day. We sold our house. We moved into my sister's townhouse until we could find a house that was less expensive than the house we sold. So I want to prep the stage of, I'd been open for a year. We sold our house. I wasn't making any money. Then the pandemic hits, right? Then I find out I'm pregnant. So these things are kind of piling into our campfire. But again, I only see the goal. I only see where we're going. And I believe as long as I was staying true to what I valued so much, which was the patient in front of me, everything was going to be okay. And we still talk about this to this day. Since Stout Wellness has opened, we have never made a business decision based on a P&L. We have always made a business decision based on the patient in front of us. Mm-hmm. And I think this is really, I know not everybody that's listening is in healthcare. Probably most of your leaders are not. But when I think about this, it's so critical because the patient in front of me was my marketing. I didn't have a budget, right? I'm barely able to pay our rent. My one employee, I can't pay me for 2.5 years. I do not have a marketing budget. So as a leader, what is my marketing? My marketing is the person in front of me, that patient that's walking in the door. So even though the pandemic seems like a big piece, like I had to close down half of the practice and I'm finding out I'm pregnant and I had horrible morning sickness. I'm literally laying on the ground in between patients. So you pile that on. It was actually that first year of proving that this can work. I can pay my bills, like calling about every new patient, showing up. And also one of the things as a leader is nobody can know at the time, nobody could know that I wasn't even sure. Like, you know, as there's always this doubt, I feel like, is this going to work? Is it going to work? But then I knew it has to work, right? I'm committed for 5 years on this lease of over $7,000 a month. I am not going to fail. And I think it's this, I am not going to fail. I am not going to fail. I know I can do this, that just kept pushing through. But it was actually the first year that was more, I mean, it was hard selling our house. I went from a job that had a great salary, having paid time off, to getting married soon before this, selling our house, having no income, no paid time off, right? If you're gone, you're not seeing patients, how are we going to pay the bills? And then fast forwarding to where we are today, 6 years later, is really remarkable. But my emotional state, it was just another obstacle at that point. It was just another obstacle.
Your emotional state was another obstacle? Is that what you're saying?
Like my emotional state was like, this is just another obstacle. Like there was no, the more, I always say, I like to keep my life very full versus busy. I had a patient that said that once, and it sounded so much more positive. I keep my life very full and I'm very focused on our goals that my mental health, except for this loneliness that happened the first 6 months that I was referring to as a leader, you can get really lonely. And I joined Entrepreneurial Organization, EO. But I feel like as long as you know what you're doing and you believe in what you're doing, that keeps your eye on the prize, that you don't have time to worry about your emotional state and what are you going to do? And am I feeling sad, anxious, depressed? And probably bad advice. You're over here like that you should be assessing this, but personalities like mine, we're looking at that prize and we're just going to continue to do what we need to do to get there. And so I just knew I would never stop until it was successful.
Yeah. So I'm hearing that actually comes naturally to you, is keeping your eye on that prize. For people that may not be their MO, the way they operate, but we can all take some guidance from your approach because of the success that you've achieved, that the more you can stay focused on your vision, the more you can block out the distractions, the more successful you will be.
And I really feel like as a leader, there's multiple buckets that are so critical to the success of an organization. And that the vision is a big one. Like the leader, the CEO, the entrepreneur, they are in charge of the vision, right? But the piece that won't get you anywhere is if the people in your boat aren't on that same vision, if you guys aren't rowing in the same direction. So I feel like the people and the culture. So there was two big things I constantly went back to. What is best for the patient? And how do I create a work environment that nobody ever wants to leave? Because it is so much harder to hire and train than to retain, both on the patient side and the people side. And so I think those are the two buckets. As I'm looking at the vision and I keep going, part of my motivation to do that is to show up for my patients and to show up for my employees, right? And to create this experience that they don't ever want to leave.
That's beautiful, because one of the concepts that I've been talking about is the expansion of who, from a CEO, from a leader's perspective, who's my constituency. And too often it's the stockholders that CEOs see as their constituency. And now we're beginning to expand that to include the customer, as you're talking about, being so important to you, and also your employees that are so important to you. And it's an approach that I'm hearing actually creates efficiency, because my hunch is you have very little turnover, and in other large corporations, turnover can cost a lot of money.
It does, always. We've maybe lost 2 to 3 employees since we've opened doors in 2019, and it's been for very specific reasons. And so retention is huge, and a lot of my energy goes towards retention. And there's a few ways we've really evaluated retention and really focused on this from a leader perspective, is realizing that your core values for a patient and your employees can actually be very different. And so we've really dialed down on what our core values are for our employees and who expresses those and why we would hire based on those. So, just some of the examples, we know if somebody doesn't have a growth mindset, they don't thrive in our work environment. Like, it is a number one core value. And we look at growth mindset personally and professionally. Are you wanting to personally become the best version of you and professionally be the best version of you? And if you don't, we're not a place for stagnant people to be. I don't even like to use the word, I call it a job. It's just, if you're coming to clock in, clock out, it's just not the right culture environment for you. And, I can go through, we have 4 core values just really fast, but relentless customer service. And I always say I choose the word relentless because it feels a little negative, because sometimes it is, but it's all about the patient in front of us. And that's what's propelled our growth. And ego is the enemy. And we really talk about this a lot, is there's no position at STAT that's higher than another position. And everybody feels that. So everybody's voices are heard and they feel deeply connected in what we're doing at STAT, and then remaining patient focused. But it took me some time to realize, because I thought as a leader, here's our core values. Here's what STAT is. And I realized how, from a patient perspective and an employee perspective, these are actually deeply different. And so we took some time to identify that. And then we created some scorecards to score people against these core values twice a year. So we're constantly talking about them. And I don't know whether you want me to share some other examples of kind of how we focus on employees, but you may have some other questions for me.
Well, I'm loving everything that you're saying, because you're touching on all the things that I believe are important from this notion of quantum leadership. And what you're talking about here with a growth mindset, which is part of my model of resilience, by the way. What I love about it here, it's not just you trying to create everything at the top. It's you empowering other people, or finding people who want to be empowered. And so the results of what you get are not just from your effort and then trying to push other people in that direction, but you have a set of people, an environment of people who are all pulling in the same direction, who are all trying to be the best version of themselves. And it's interesting, my first podcast is with the Prime Minister, Ralph Gonsalves, a brilliant, brilliant leader of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And what he talks about is the X factor. And what he means by the X factor is very similar to what you're talking about. His X factor is is a leader who can pull the best out of everybody else.
Yes.
And so I'm hearing something very similar here. And I love that values are so important to you. And what I also love is that you're demonstrating, you're a case example of how focusing on values actually produces better bottom line results.
Absolutely. And even to your point of kind of pulling out the best in people, we realized we really needed to create a platform to do just that. And so we started calling it Rewind to Innovate. And so we allowed teams to get together, close the office on a Friday afternoon once a quarter, get together with their team. And Rewind was what has been going on. Let's look at what we're currently doing to innovate, which was to what can we do better, more efficiently, more creatively. And so then they get to present on it in front of the team. And so we really wanted to create a platform to allow them to pull the best out of everybody and to then have a voice. Because employees at the end of the day, they want to know that they're having value. Like everybody in life, no matter what you're doing, you want to have a purpose. You want to feel valued. And I kept thinking about this and I was like, we're all so busy with patients, on a daily basis, doing our things. I don't feel like we've created a space for them to have this formal voice. And so that's where Rewind to Innovate came from. And the feedback's been really good. And just taking a step back from the day to day and being together with similar positions within the organization, it's just so powerful. So creating an environment for your employees to become the best version of themselves, give them the space to do it.
And I love that you are also have an intention of having your employees feel valued.
Yes.
This is a universal need that we all have, is to feel valued. And most people don't feel that in their lives. And certainly most at work don't feel that at work. And I think that's a shortcoming of leaders within the work environment. So to make that an intention of yours to show your employees that they have value, I think is a key ingredient to your success.
Well, and what's interesting? I actually had this visualization a couple weeks ago that we've gradually been delegating and putting people into lead positions, right? When you have an organization, you have to start having leads over teams. Like that's how you really scale, that are an exact representation of what you want stat to be. But what I started thinking about in these leaders is when you look at organizational charts, it's usually the leader and the team underneath them. And it became really transparent to me. And I think this is just a visual of servant leadership, but it's actually the opposite, right? It's the leaders under the team. And I refer to it in the way that a leader is really designed to elevate their employees under them. So it's not only elevating them, but how do we make their life easier? How do we improve systems and processes? How do they feel valued? And so I had this image. I was like, man, I want to flip all of Stat Wellness's organizational charts. And I want to put me at the very bottom and work up.
Nice. So continually innovating your model, continually innovating how you lead is part of your success as well. And you talked about scaling up. And I'd like to know how you transition from like one employee to 40 employees. And I noticed also you have 3 existing wellness centers, and you're about to open 2 more in the next couple of months. And you have plans for 3 additional ones next year. So let's start from the beginning. And how do you get from 1 to 40, and how do you plan to get from 40 to whatever that number will be in a year from now?
Well, and I think the question is always too, how do you maintain the culture as you go from 1 to 40? Because for me, when it was one employee, me and her would sit in the room and work together. It was just the two of us, right?
Right.
How do we keep that culture? Because I'm not in each location, in each space. And so I think one of the big things when you go from 1 to 40 is getting really, really clear on job positions, expectations, right? I found that the more you're just subjectively going into meetings like, hey, you're doing a great job, the harder it is, because I'm a you're doing a great job person. So for us to scale from 1 to 40, we had to get really clear on what jobs we were filling, what the description, what the expectations were in that role, what their specific scorecards were that we meet with them twice a year. And then creating an environment where everybody got to work together. As I mentioned, the rewind to innovate, creating opportunities for them to meet alongside their peers. But from 1 to 40, it was first, we're all doing everything, right? Like everybody's doing everything. Nobody's specializing in anything. We're wearing 500 different hats. You get to 10, okay, we're still doing everything. You get to 15, we're starting to get specific roles. You get to 20, 25. Okay, we've got really specific roles. For us, the 35 to 40 got to leaders, right? We started being able to delegate and elevate leaders over the employees to keep the culture and quality there, because I can't manage 40 employees and keep the quality and culture there. So I think when you go from 1 to 40, and hopefully we're going to get to 300 and 500 and more, it's clear expectations, job descriptions, leaders, and really having a path to growth. And then it goes back to our core values. But you don't go from 1 to 40 overnight. It's a gradual process. And it's been really fun as we've gone through and written out all of the job descriptions, how far we've come in the 6 years when it comes to clarity of each role. Because we just didn't have that for the first 3 years. It's like, I don't know who's doing what. We're all doing everything. And then the separating spaces, that was the next challenge is,
Right.
I can't be at each location. At the beginning, when you have one location, you can control everything. At least you feel like you can. You never can control everything, but you feel like you can. You start having locations that you're not at. You have no idea what's going on. I mean, you can get words and you have to have trust, right? You have to build a strong foundation and you have to have trust. And that's easier for some people than other people.
Right. So let's shift the conversation a little bit and talk about your brand and how you built your brand, how you're continuing to build your brand.
There was a quote I loved that I read one time, that brand is the art of differentiation. And so when I've thought about brand, I've really thought of what does that mean for us? And it's really, one, how are we different than anyone else that does functional medicine? That is our unique brand. But it's also our reputation. So what do people say about us when we're not around? How do we focus on that reputation? And it really goes back to the patient, right? It really goes back to that patient that walks through the door. How do we give them the best experience? And what are they saying about us when we're not there? So I always think of brand as a reputation. And what are you doing to support that reputation? There was a statistic that 86% of consumers will buy from a company they trust. And I think that's really interesting, because if you think about just even buying a product, ours is a little bit more personal because you're coming in and talking about your healthcare. But people want to trust a brand. They want authenticity. They want consistency. And you think about this with the Chick-fil-A model. You go in and you get the same, my pleasure, my pleasure, my pleasure, right? They've built a strong brand and they've differentiated themselves against their competition in fast food, right? So I've always thought about this with stat, like, what is our differentiator? And sometimes it's as simple as the way we listen to our patients, right? That they feel safe and heard. You talked about earlier the basic need of all of us want to feel valued. You could even take that a step further and say, we want to feel safe and heard in our healthcare and in any decision that we make in life. And so I think our brand has really been the art of differentiation and our reputation, and focusing on those two things in our decision making.
Beautiful. We've covered a lot of territory on leadership and what are some core elements of that. What other characteristics of a leader would you emphasize are important? What other qualities or what other abilities or approaches would you say are important that we haven't touched on yet?
I really feel like, and I know I touched on this, but I think the servant leadership, people want to work for someone that they know is willing to step in and do the work too. I feel like if there's somebody at the top that every day it's just delegating, there's a time and a place for that. But I think our employees at Stat, they know that I put in the work. I'm willing to help them. So the other day I came in and one of our nurses that was drawing labs had a pediatric draw that was really tough. And I had a meeting and some things to do, but I put that aside and I was like, I'm here to help you. We're going to draw these patients, get you caught up, and then I'll go back and do the things I need to do. And people feel that when they know that the leader has their back in the most simple terms, it creates a very positive environment where they feel safe. And I think that's been so critical to me is being honest, being authentic, being able to step in and help, having a servant-based, selfless leadership style, I think is really important. And then again, going back to setting clear expectations. I have found any times I felt like that was not the best move or I failed in this moment or this moment, a lot of it goes back to I did not set clear expectations. It's on me that I was not clear. And the more I've gotten clear, the easier these meetings go, consults, conversations. I think that's really important. And there was this talk I heard one time about the stages of leadership. And I worked really hard because I was stuck in this, what they consider to be stage 4, where you're kind of in the circus ring, where you really at the end of the day think that you know what's best for the company. This mindset of, I know what's best for the company. I've been here so long. And I started going back to, I really want to figure out what do I need to do to go from level 4 to level 5. And stage 5 of leadership is being able to be in a room and not have to speak. Being in a room and listening to what other people have to offer. And also realizing that maybe your opinion is not always right. And so that was something that I focused on this year. Last year was all about delegating. This year is all about listening. So delegate to elevate and listen. And that's where the rewind to innovate came from.
And so when you talk about listen, what comes up for me is a willingness to recognize I don't have all the answers. When you're willing to listen, it also implies that you are open for people to give you feedback. And I know that in organizations, sometimes it's very, there's this big wall between you and, say, the leader, the CEO, and that it's very intimidating to even think about giving feedback. Could you say a little bit about the importance of creating an environment in which people feel more comfortable and safe being able to give feedback, even if it's maybe a point of some controversy?
Absolutely. I think having a safe working environment is so critical to our success, and I would say any organization's success. And if you think about this in even the simplest terms, if you as a leader have a mindset that you know what's best, as I went back to before, you're dealing with one brain, one set of ideas, right? If you create an environment that's open to other people's feedback, other people's ideas, it doesn't mean you implement everything. But if you create a safe space where you can hear it, now you're putting 41 brains together to propel you on the vision and the goals, right? So if you just think about this in the simplest of terms, why not create an environment where you're getting multiple brains working towards your vision?
Right.
Which sounds so simple, but if people don't feel safe and people aren't speaking up, you're getting one leader's brain, insights, thoughts, and direction. Also, I think it's really important in healthcare for us to create a safe space where if somebody makes a mistake, they can talk about it, right? That they know their job's not we don't want to create an environment where they feel like they need to lie or hide things because they're at risk for losing their job. Mistakes happen. And I feel like in every role and every person, you learn from your mistakes. And chances are, if you create an environment where they can acknowledge their mistakes, they aren't going to make that mistake again.
Yeah. So ultimately, it's back to the growth mindset where you learn from your mistakes, and it's okay to, and particularly if you're going to be doing something new, there's always the potential for making mistakes since you've not done it before. And so you want there to be an environment in which that's okay, where you're not come down on hard for a mistake, and that you know that that's the environment you're in. And so that gives you a sense of security and safety. And the interesting thing from a psychological perspective and how the brain works is that the more safe we feel, the less likely we are to make a mistake, because our brains are going to function better when we are worrying less, have less tension. So it's interesting that the safety of the environment actually helps the brain function better.
Well, and if you create an environment too where mistakes aren't possible, they aren't working to their fullest potential either. And again, to the growth mindset where you want to be growing, developing, and working towards a purpose. And so mistakes are bound to happen. And I would absolutely agree. I always think about, even in like our environment where we're doing blood draws, you miss a vein, chances are like you made a mistake, you don't feel safe, you're going to miss again and again. So we have so it's exact what you're talking about. When you feel safe, less mistakes happen.
Yeah. And this conversation leads back to the notion of authenticity of leadership. I want your definition of authenticity and what's important there for you.
So I go back and forth with authenticity as a leader because I am, but there's certain things that your employees don't need to know, right? Like I think back to when the pandemic first happened, I don't want to be messaging them like, are we going to have to shut down? Are we going to have to terminate our lease? Are all of you going to be laid off? So there's like certain levels of authenticness that you want as a leader. And then there's certain levels of professionalism and creating safe environments. So for me, it shows up as being who I am. I never try to be anybody that I'm not. Pros and cons, right? But I think that is being true to who I am and knowing when or when not to share. You can overshare, in my opinion, as a leader. And sometimes I even get to this on my own. We do a retreat, we do a pool party at my house, we do a bunch of team building things. And sometimes I'll end the weekend and I'm like, I really overshared. Like your team doesn't need to know everything about you. To me, that's not authentic. That's not what it means to be authentic. What it means to be authentic is be true to who you are and don't try to put characteristics or morals or values that you don't express. So for me, honesty is huge. I'm always going to be honest with my team, but that doesn't mean oversharing, if that makes sense. There's certain
absolutely makes sense.
So I think it's being true to who you are, and whatever your core values are as an organization, make sure that you express those core values, right? So don't have ego as the enemy on your core values if you truly believe there's a massive hierarchy and that your role is better than others, because there will be a mismatch of what you say it is and how you display it to be. So when I think of authenticity, it's your core values should match your actions and you should be who you are.
And when you come from that place, your employees know what to expect. And there's less guesswork on their part. There's less uncertainty, and all of that contributes to greater stability.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Kristin, this has been such a wonderful, enlightening conversation with you. I really appreciate all of your wisdom that you're sharing with the audience. As we wrap up here, any last words you want to share, and then perhaps how people can learn more about Stat Wellness?
Absolutely. I think the last piece is, again, at the top, it can be lonely because you can't overshare with everybody, right? So any leaders listening, find a community, because we know community is so critical to our success as leaders. So we know loneliness is the new smoking. I really feel like that affects leaders too, right? We don't stay lonely at the top. Find your community outside of the organization to feel connected. Look for those mentors in your life. I think that's so critical to the mental health of the leader. Also, make sure as a leader, you're taking care of yourself. So I obviously specialize in functional medicine, but cheesiest statement, you can't pour from an empty cup. Make sure you're doing the basic things you can to show up as the best form of yourself. Are you prioritizing sleep, healthy nutrition, exercise, all of those things that are so insightful and so important for who you are when you come into work? And last piece is, how can you find me? My personal website is Kristin Oja, KRISTINOJA.com. And then our business is statwellness.com, which stands for Strength to Achieve Total Wellness. We're on Instagram and Facebook, website, all of those things, which I can give you for the show notes. But please reach out. I love talking on this and supporting leaders, especially female leaders. That is something I'm super passionate about, and preventing burnout.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you again, Kristin. And thank you, everybody, for listening in to this really informative episode of Quantum Leadership. If you know others who might be interested in this information, please share our links and our information with them so that they can enjoy these important lessons as well. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining me on this Quantum Leadership podcast. I hope today's conversation has inspired you to think bigger, lead more authentically, and take steps toward meaningful change. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with others and make sure you subscribe and go to my website, drstephensideroff.com. Thank you again.